Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit here with another interview. We've been doing rather well on the Kickstarter front, especially the major Kickstarter front. We recently brought you an interview with one of the most successful crowdfunded games of all time, that being Project Eternity. So we thought we'd go one better, bring you an interview with the most successful crowdfunded game of all time up to this point, and with none other than Chris Roberts, the guy at the helm of the mighty battlecruiser that is Star Citizen. Welcome to the show.
Hey, well, happy to be here, John.
Excellent. So, for those who do not know who you are, why don't you give us a little bit of a history of Chris Roberts?
I've been making games for a long time. I started back in England working on the BBC Micro. I think my first game was, the first commercial game that came out published by Imagine Software was Wizardor. And then I did Match Day for the BBC Micro, which was the football game, and Strikers Run.
I own Strikers Run.
Wow.
Oh, God. Strikers Run was actually one of my favorite games when I was... God, when did I play that? Was I 6 or 7? Yeah, I think so. And Codename Droid was its sequel. Oh, I'm having a massive nostalgia rush here.
Yeah, no, I was quite proud of that, and I can't remember how many colors were left in the on the BBC Micro, but you had basically a 32K and 20K was your screen.
Yeah,
you had to be pretty smart about how you fit all the graphics and coding, and then I moved over to went to my father was a teacher at Manchester University, and he got recruited to America to teach in University of Texas in Austin, and so I was going to Manchester University, and I went to visit my parents, and the weather was a bit nicer and all that, and I took a year off from university to carry on working on making games, and I never went back basically, but I made a game called Times of Law, and that was sort of a combination gauntlet looking top-down game with RPG elements. And then there was another game called Bad Blood, which was a sort of post-apocalyptic game using the Times of Law engine. And then in 1990, I made Wing Commander, which is my sort of big claim to fame. And that became a huge success. And it's mostly inspired by my love of Star Wars and escaping into a whole different world and sci-fi. And I always wanted to be the pilot flying the ship instead of someone watching it on a screen. And so then I oversaw Wing Commander 1, 2, 3, 4, Privateer, the spin-offs. And then in 96, I left Origin/Electronic Arts because Origin had been bought by Electronic Arts in 92 and started my own company called Digital Anvil. And that's where I developed Freelancer. And then we also had a few other games like Brute Force, which was on the Xbox, and Conquest Frontier Wars, and Starlancer, Starlancer was actually made in England by a bunch of my old school buddies from Manchester that worked on Privateer 2 at a company called Warthog. They developed it for us at Digital Anvil. And then I sold Digital Anvil to Microsoft in the beginning of 2001 and then I took a break from the game business because I was burned out. And now I went off and did films for a while, and now I'm back wanting to make games, and Star Citizen is my first project.
Welcome back indeed, considering that most of the games you've listed are actually among some of my favorite games of all time. It's a little hard for me to stay objective in this interview. Starlancer, I actually feel, was the best story-driven space combat game that's ever been made by anybody. Some people will disagree with it. Some people think that Freelancer is a better game. I personally just loved Starlancer. I feel that the way the game was paced was phenomenal. But that's something I'm certainly hoping to see from your new title.
No, you're definitely going to see that. No, I mean, Starlancer was definitely. I think Starlancer was done well, and and all the lads in Manchester that I mean, I grew up with them, and they're all very talented. And I think Starlancer also, Freelancer at the end, because I left and it still was another couple of years to get done, and Microsoft kind of wanted to get out the door. So I think that, if I was going to critique Freelancer towards the end, is it sort of got a bit generic in some places where it sort of felt like there were more cookie cutter missions. Mm-hmm. And Starlancer still had it was a story, and it was focused on sort of that and developing it. So I think, for me, in Star Citizen, in the Squadron 42 side, but also in the Star Citizen side, you're certainly going to get my style of storytelling. So even though it's sort of a big open world in the Star Citizen side. It's going to have character and it's going to have personality. So if you actually go to our website, the Robert Space Industries site, we publish like fiction, I think, twice a week. There's a storyline. Cal Mason, who's like sort of the military sort of hero guy, and then there's a guy as a pirate called Kid Crimson, and that's an example of sort of like the character and that I want to have in the world. So you sort of have characters, and you can sort of hold on to it versus it just being sort of a generic, NPC. So yeah, it's big on my list. So hopefully you'll be happy with what happens in Star Citizen Squadron 42.
Hopefully we will as well. So why don't you explain to those who are a little bit confused, because there's actually quite a few people that were really kind of weirded out by the way that the game was presented, in that Star Citizen and then Squadron 42 are sort of separate things, and yet they're not. So why don't you explain the difference between the two and what's actually going on there?
Okay, well, so the way I always pictured it, right, and it's kind of a little bit the way that Privateer was with Wing Commander, is that I've got this big universe, and I'm going to let people do the universe. That's the sort of open world sandbox side. But I definitely like a sort of narrative and a story that I carry along. And so I wanted to have the ability to essentially have that inside this big open sandbox world. And that was kind of where the conception of Squadron 42 came from, which was you essentially can sign up for a tour of duty with the military doing a Wing Commander style campaign, which will be sort of your sort of traditional branching mission campaign with narrative. And it sort of works well because, when you join the military, it's not, you can't like say, oh, I'm going to go off here for a week or two. No, you'd be unable. So it's sort of nice in this idea of an open world, because if you join up to the military, you sort of accept that I'm doing my tour of duty and I'm stuck on this path, and they tell me that I'm going to fight in this system, I'm fighting this system, then they're going to tell me I'm going over here, I'm going over here. So that was kind of how I sort of integrated it, because my idea is to try and have this world in such a way that you just sort of can play around in it a lot, and it's not something that you play and then after a couple of weeks you're on to some other game. So my idea is I've got this big sort of open sandbox that you can be doing whatever you want in it, and if you want to be joining, so you join up and do the single player campaign, and we'll also introduce new sort of single player campaigns down the road, and a lot of them can be in the military, but not necessarily. Maybe there'll be something that'll be more sort of like aimed at a kind of Han Solo style adventure. So I sort of want to have the single player experience inside this sort of bigger sandbox world, and I think if I can pull it off, it'll be quite cool, because what it will allow you to do is have that experience that you like, but then when you finish with it, you're still sort of interacting and experiencing that universe, killing time if you have, until you get the next little, and until we can crank out the next little story for you. And I'm kind of viewing the stories for us as being, I'm viewing it like being in the TV business, where it's not like a movie that you get once every couple of years or every year. It's like, okay, we've got to have 3 or 4 sort of campaigns or stories a year at least, and they're good ones. I mean, they should be like the way it was on the Wing Commander games with the secret missions and the special operations, and they sort of feel like they're really good, and not, because there is some DLC nowadays. Some is decent and some isn't decent, and so I definitely want to be on the the entertaining and decent side, and not feeling like it's just a cash in to try and crank a bit more cash from the players.
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult to deliver story on a regular basis to the point where people actually care about it as well. When DLC comes down 6 months down the line, a lot of people have finished up with the campaign and they don't really want to revisit it. There's some that even pops in which not so much negates the story, doesn't really roll it back or anything like that, but it seems pointless, because if you've already beaten the game, then you essentially go back and play something which ultimately doesn't matter. It's not particularly enjoyable at all.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, that's kind of... part of the goal, even on the open world game, is that we're constantly adding content to it, including sort of story missions. And I think the way I'm viewing it is that we'll always be adding sort of like 3 or 4 or 5 mission sort of mini narratives around the universe, and then the bigger updates, the bigger sort of campaigns, they're more like a 30 or 40 or 50 mission sort of story thread, and that's sort of like an actual sort of separate update or package you would go. But since it's all in this universe, and this universe is constantly changing, or always adding content, and the sort of storyline and timelines going along, hopefully it's always going to feel relevant. So, like for instance, if you sign up for, and go back for another tour of duty after you've done Squadron 42, that tour of duty will be around events that are happening in sort of the open, the persistent universe. So it'll sort of feel, I think, hopefully, immediate to the world you're in. So it won't feel separate, and it'll feel like, all of a sudden there's a new storyline where the Vandal is, taking a push and have taken over a few of the systems, and now we need to, and you'll be experiencing that in the open world, and then there can be like a 30 mission campaign that you can play, where you can actually sign up for the military to fight that campaign to push the Vandal back, and then later on in the open world you would have the storyline will be like, okay, the UEE forces have managed to push the Vandal back. So I'm hoping to have them feed off each other, sort of feed into each other, and it all just feels like one big holistic universe. I mean, it could be complete failure too, but I'm hoping it won't be.
It's ambitious. There's no real question about that. And one other thing that's ambitious would have to be the way that you're actually setting up Star Citizen. Now, what you're claiming with Star Citizen is that you're going to have a persistent universe of some description. Can you explain to the viewers how that's actually going to work?
Okay. So the way the persistent on the simplest level, the persistent universe is keeping track of what your location is, what assets you have, so that's your ship, what the upgrades are, what your credits are, and what your reputation is. And so we're sort of keeping a track of where you are in the universe. And then when you sort of launch into space, we're dynamically putting other players in your instances depending on where you are. So the difference between what we're doing and also the players in your instance that you would fight with will also depend on kind of how you set the game. So you can say, I'm more into PvE versus PvP, and then you'll have a lot less sort of random encounters and more NPC encounters. And if you're more into PvP, you can sort of have a lot more player encounters. And also, if you're doing the PvP side of things, then you're going to get sort of your reputation points, or your standings and rankings will be higher, because obviously it's tougher to fight real players than to fight NPCs. But the idea is, unlike, say, a World of Warcraft, where you're in one permanent instance and there's like whatever it is, 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 people in that instance, we have smaller instances, but they're sort of temporary. So it depends on what area of space. So like there's an instance around an orbit of a planet, there'll be an instance around like a location in space, an asteroid field or a jump point. And as you arrive into the instance, if there's slots open, you just get put into it. If that instance is full, then the game would create a second instance that would put you in, and then again, more players will be put into that. So it's sort of dynamically placing you in instances. So the benefit of it is that you as a player will be in this universe with every player. You're not going to be partitioned into separate instances. You're not going to be able to get every player in the instance at one time. But we're dynamically sort of matching up players. So like your friend, like we'll know who you'll have your list of squadron mates or something, and so that they'll if there's an instance and your squadron mates are in, then you'll get put into that instance. So we sort of match you up to people that you play with. So there's a criteria like who your squadron mates are, like for instance what your affiliations are. And then, like, for instance, what your ping would be. So we try and match up. So we're sort of dynamically matchmaking people as we're going along. And I hope it will work well. I mean, what I hope it will do is it will sort of, to everyone, it will sort of be a combination of a single player experience and a multiplayer experience all at once. So I don't know if you played Demon Souls, but I
yes, I did.
So I very much like that, and I thought, probably if you were thinking about someone that like really pushed forward, like kind of thinking about multiplayer, because everyone kind of does it the same way, right? And then Demon Souls had this really nice way where you were kind of playing the single player campaign, but you had these messages from other players. You could have someone come in and help you kill a boss, or someone could invade your space as a Black Phantom, and it was sort of a hybrid, and I really sort of like that. So I'm sort of taking a little bit of that as an idea and trying to expand it more so in what we're doing. So, it still has to be, fully working and played and balanced. And, like I said, like on some of the other ideas I have, I think they will be good, but, proof's in the pudding. But I'm hoping it will have that. It will give me the feeling that I always like when I play sort of the single player experience, but also give me the ability to be matched up against other players or even talking or interacting with other players. So the universe feels a little more alive and dynamic.
Now, do you feel that this is the way that multiplayer is actually going over the next few years? You did mention Demon's Souls. Dark Souls, of course, does the same thing. I believe there's a couple of other titles that have this meta multiplayer idea going on, and yours is perhaps the most ambitious thus far. Is this something that you feel is unique to Star Citizen, or do you see the games industry going this way in the next few years?
Well, it's hard to. It's hard to say. I'm really picking it because it's sort of the way that it's not so much that I'm sort of making a decision about what I think the game industry is doing. I'm just sort of trying to think as me as a player what I like and what I don't like. And for me, it feels like the best balance between what I like about the single player experience and what I like about the multiplayer experience. Because I play things like Battlefield 2 Bad Company or Battlefield 3, and I like those a lot in the fact that I can be, the fact that I play against other real players, but also because I play with my friends and we work as a team together. So I like those aspects. But also, if I'm adventuring around in a universe, I kind of like, I don't always want to be forced into that. So for me, I kind of want to have something that's like a balance between the two of them. And this is the best I could come up with. So, it feels right to me. And maybe it is the way, because I think maybe there are people, like me that sort of like that kind of balance between the two. But I wouldn't say that it's the future. I think people are, I think the multiplayer aspect is still, our industry making games is new generally, right? Because it's only really been around for about 30 years.
Yep.
But the multiplayer aspect's even newer because, it's only been maybe the last 10 years that the internet's been decent enough that you could be doing this kind of stuff. And really only over the last 3 or 4 years that it's been fast enough to do sort of the higher fidelity stuff. So I think we're all still trying to figure out, what the best models are and how it does. And that's kind of why you see it evolving.
Fair enough. Now, a quick question, just from a technical standpoint. The whole server system does sound rather complicated for someone that doesn't have any real knowledge of programming, but one has to wonder about the actual cost to you as the company. This is a server system you're going to have to keep running over potentially an indefinite period. So how does that factor into the amount of money that you've raised? And do you feel that you're going to need to raise additional funds after the game has come out in order to support these servers?
Well, there's definitely, the design of the game is in such a way that hopefully we'll be bringing in additional revenue, Guild Wars 2 style, because we'll be either selling new ships for people or people will be buying some credits with real money because they don't want to spend 10 hours a week, flying around, adventuring, trading, earning money on missions. And, it's sort of it's the World of Tanks model where, you can sit there and you can go through the levels and get yourself to a Tiger tank. But there's some people that will just want to get in for a couple of hours and drive a Tiger tank and not do the work to get there. And it's, they do a fairly decent job of balancing in that. And, they're completely free to play, right? So, Star Citizen isn't free to play. You just buy it once and then hopefully the ongoing costs are maintained by the revenue we bring in. So that, that's the goal. So obviously we're hoping and expecting to bring some money in as we're playing. Obviously the game has to be good for that. We're also designing the server system. It's actually an easier server system and requires less sort of dedicated servers than sort of the old school sort of World of Warcraft model because of the way we're distributing it. Because really what it's more like is a multiplayer game with temporary instances. So that would be like a Battlefield 3 or a World of Tanks kind of thing. And then the persistent universe thing's really sort of doing the matchmaking and moving you around. So in that particular setup, it should be less. And we're going to try and have the servers in such a way that we can distribute them around sort of more in the cloud versus having dedicated server systems. So those are all things that we're trying to do so that we make the costs more reasonable. And then, of course, there's always the backup because we're allowing you to host your own server. So, 20 years down, I mean, I'm not saying people will be playing it 20 years down the road, but, Freelancer itself is, 9 years after it's come out, it's still got, a decent player base that do a lot of modding and run their own servers because when we did Freelancer, we gave them the opportunity to host their own servers. So that's sort of like the backup because, I don't want to be in, and it's also, by the way, one of the reasons why I set and raised the money to do what we're doing and not do it directly at EA or Activision or whatever, because this way I can control the server side. Because you don't want to be in that situation where you have your game and then your big publisher says, "Oh, not profitable anymore," so the servers. So that was something that I was pretty that was pretty important for me and why I took the route I took.
Absolutely. There's no question. I think those of you who've had the chance to play EA Sports games are probably keenly aware of what tends to happen when people decide somewhere in the depths of EA that these servers should not be running anymore. Bit of a problem. One way or the other, it's heartening to hear that, and of course, this game will contain modding support. You can find out more information over at robertspaceindustriescom. There's a lot of info there. I'd like to ask you briefly about your support of the Oculus Rift, because it's not something I've had a chance to really ask a developer as of yet, and it is, I wouldn't say one of your headlining features, but it's definitely prominent on your page that you support the use of the Oculus Rift technology. What's your personal opinion on that?
Well, no, I love it. I mean, I mean, basically, I'm not sure it's something that I'm supporting because I think it's going to sell a lot of copies. I'm supporting it just because, for me, the fantasy of sitting in your cockpit and looking around the proper virtual reality, with the Rift, it's the best one that I've seen yet. I mean, it's got a very low latency as you're looking around. And then, of course, if you're actually sitting in a cockpit holding a joystick and you've got this, it's actually a better experience in terms of virtual reality than, say, the Doom BFG demo that's going because, in that one, you're walking around, and so it's a bit weird because you move your head, and that your head's like where you're aiming your gun. Yeah. And so, playing that sort of feels a bit disconcerting, but actually sitting in a cockpit, you've got your physical joystick in front of you, and you've got the headset on. I mean, essentially, you're essentially, I mean, other than having a flight chair and giving you some G-forces, it's about as close as you're going to get to virtual reality. And so for me, that's kind of my, and part of that whole idea with Star Citizen going on the PC side is getting back to that old PC level of, you've got a badass peripheral, you got a great joystick, or, even in the old days, Wing Commander 2 was the first to really do Sound Blast to digitize speech. Because that's what I like about PC. I like the fact that everyone can try out these bleeding edge technologies on the PC, and there's always something new to try. And so I'm a big supporter of that. So that's actually a big focus with me on Star Citizen. And for me, the virtual reality dream sort of was there for a long time, and no one really pushed the sort of headset or the glasses thing. And there's not really a good reason because high resolution displays are really cheap now, thanks to mobile phones and everything. And of course, you've got, the whole way you can figure out what your orientation is and stuff, because that's again being all used for phones and controllers. So, it's almost like, I don't know why someone hadn't been doing something like the Rift a while ago. So yeah, they're a startup, and I kind of sort of feel an affinity with them. So yeah, I'm a big supporter. I mean, I backed it before I launched Star Citizen. I didn't, it wasn't anything cynical. I just thought, hey, this is cool. So I put my money down quite a long time ago. So they didn't even know that I'd backed it when we started talking. But we're not far from each other. They're about 45 minutes away from where I'm based in LA, and they're a bunch of good guys, and I think they'll do some good stuff.
It's interesting that you say that the whole virtual reality thing just kind of disappeared for a while, because I recall using very early versions of it a long time ago. I even remember playing Heretic with one of these headsets, and it didn't really work out so well, and then the whole thing disappeared for a while, which is rather appropriate considering that's exactly what happened really to space games and space sims in general. Can you explain, being essentially an industry insider, what on earth happened? Why did space sims disappear? Why did combat sims not become popular? And why are we now seeing a resurgence?
Well, I mean, we'll have to see whether it's a full resurgence until my game and a few other games come out and be successful. But I think there's a couple of reasons why it shifted. One, Sims were particularly a sort of PC focused game, and round about the so 2001, 2002, and onwards, everyone started to move away from PCs and move into consoles. So like a good example is Digital Anvil, which was the company that I founded. We did freelancer at. I mean, Microsoft bought us primarily because they wanted to have more development for Xbox. And so all our PC titles got repurposed to Xbox titles, and if they didn't, they got killed. And Freelancer was released, and then that was it. It wasn't sort of like wanting to continue. And in the early days, the way I feel is that when people first shifted to console, they sort of had this feeling that Sims wouldn't work on a console. And in fact, they had a feeling that first-person shooters wouldn't work on a console, right? It took the Infinity Ward guys to, basically bully Activision into letting them do Modern Warfare and having it released on the console. And, they came up with their controller scheme. And now, obviously, first-person shooters are, one of the biggest sellers and genres on consoles. And so I think it's a combination of the shift to console where people sort of viewed, well, consoles don't do Sims. And then the other thing is, I think every genre has like one or two lead developers that sort of push it and, get funded decent amounts by the publishers to make the games. And, I was the guy that was, could get the funding to do, really ambitious space games. And I was burned out. So I sort of quit the industry. And I think there wasn't a sort of high-profile developer like me that sort of stepped into the fold. I mean, CCP did what they did with Eve, which was really cool. But in the other genres, like I just mentioned, Infinity Ward, well, they pushed forward the sort of first-person military shooter, which, by the way, back in the 90s, no one was into military shooters. It was all sort of more the kind of sci-fi, Doom, Quake style stuff. So they were there to push it. Obviously, id was obviously continuing to push first-person shooters, and you had Bungie pushing first-person shooters with Halo and stuff. So you have those, and third-person sort of cover-based shooters was sort of Epic with Gears of War, and so you had all these sort of big high-profile developers, and some of these other I think genres sort of had the dollars invested and the backing because this is what these guys wanted to do, and so I think that's a big reason why. And I don't think it's because a console would be bad for doing a space sim, because especially the modern day consoles, I mean, they've got two joysticks on them. I mean, so in a control interface wise, it's pretty actually appropriate for an interface. I just think that there wasn't a sort of high profile developer really pushing it, and then so it sort of went away for a while. But I like, in my opinion on all these genres is, it's not so much that a genre dies, it's just that there hasn't been a good game for that genre for a while. It's like the movies, everyone's like, oh, Westerns are dead, and then someone makes a good Western and it does a lot of business. And people say that on sci-fi too, yet, Avatar is a sci-fi film and it's the biggest movie of all time. So I just think it's more about having someone make a really great game, or having developers that are passionate about it. And for whatever reason, on the space side, it was in the old days it was me, and then it was LucasArts doing their X-Wing stuff, and and I think I took a break, and I'm not quite sure what happened on the LucasArts side, but that place is always a bit crazy because they're always changing management, and George Lucas is just I think he changes his mind of like how committed he is to games on a yearly basis. So that may have been some of the problem, but I'm not privy to what was going on there. But that was kind of, I felt like, one of the reasons why things sort of faded away for a while.
Well, thankfully they are now back in full force by the looks of it. Chris Roberts, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. That was very enlightening indeed. Is there anything else you would like to say before we round this off?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone that has backed us. It's been amazing. I'm really, really happy, and I'm committed to making the best game possible, and I'll be sharing the process with all of you and enjoying that. So thank you all, and thanks, John, for your time. It was thanks for giving me a call and having a nice conversation.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for Striker's Run. It was much appreciated. My copy still works, as does my BBC Micro. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Roberts here, bringing you Star Citizen. Keep an eye out for it. Check out the website over at robertsspaceindustries.com. That is Roberts Space Industries. That's 2 S's in there, .com. You can check out all the information and all of the updates on this particular title. Looking forward to it, and we're looking at a release date at present sometime, I believe, in 2014. That'll be November 2014 is the estimated launch date. Thanks a lot, Chris. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and I will see you next time.